Hi there.
I just want to make sure you're aware that you don't come into this agenda until like
I know.
6:45,
Yeah.
7. Okay, just want to.
I'm doing other things. I'm sitting at my desk.
Okay.
I just love listening to you guys.
There's so many people who feel that way in town.
Have fun.
Thank you.
Feel that way in town. I'm hearing myself.
Okay, guys, you're all set. We're on YouTube. We're recording.
Lyle,
Yeah.
do you hear like the replay of everything we're saying?
Yeah, everybody has to put themselves on mute, except who's speaking.
Lyle, do you hear like the replay of everything we're saying?
Yeah, everybody has to put themselves on.
Hearing Lisa twice is priceless.
We could do an infinite one.
No.
Okay, we're all set. I'm gonna bug out. Oops, somebody bugged out already. Oh, there's Ike.
He's early.
He's also not coming until like 6:45, right?
Nobody put a schedule out. So.
Everyone wants to be in on this right now.
Yeah.
Well, we did indicate that the scope was going to be from 5:30 to 6:45. So although we didn't put out a schedule per se, I did include that since I knew I lost Sabrina for her planning board.
I can jump off and come back at 6:30, 6:45 if you want.
You are more than welcome to hang with us if you want. I'm just thinking that perhaps there was something else you needed to do. But
I'll come back. As much as fun as it sounds, I'll come back.
I knew you'd see it my way.
See you later.
Bye, Ike. Okay, Ivy, it's all yours. I'm bugging out.
Okay. Do we need to have a motion to go into our work?
Yes, please. Motion to go into work session?
So move to go into the work session.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, welcome everyone to the town board work session for Tuesday, April 21st, 2020. The first item that we have on our work session agenda for this evening is to review our revised and final scope for the form-based code. And before we do so, I thought maybe I would just spend a moment and sort of remind everybody as to where we are in terms of the process with creating a form-based code. So if you'll bear with me, a little bit of history. So beginning in May of last year, 2019, the town of Newcastle launched our project to rezone the Chappaqua Hamlet and to create a form-based code. A form-based code differs from traditional zoning ordinances, which regulate land use by dictating where uses can occur. Retail uses, residential uses, industrial uses, etc. A form-based code is an innovative approach that considers how our zoning relates to other issues like infrastructure, parking, open space, design, architecture, and it focuses on the form that the building takes as opposed to mandating its use. So our project to create a form-based code, of course, reflects the goals that the town set in our comprehensive plan in 2017 to preserve the town's bucolic and residential character and its historical resources while promoting new mixed-use development in the hamlets to meet the community's housing needs and foster thriving commercial and civic spaces. We have a website that you can go to. It's mynewcastle.org/rezoning, where you can find all of the videos from our meetings and past project documentation for this project. Earlier this year, this town board, acting as lead agency under seeker, issued what we call a positive declaration. So in that positive declaration, we found that there are potentially significant environmental impacts as a result of this project. And the town board determined that we wanted to do a full environmental impact assessment, or EIS. The point of doing the EIS is to be able to answer some of the questions that have been raised to date. So things like, how will increase in density in our downtown impact traffic and parking? How will the building heights that have been proposed in the draft code impact the character of the hamlet. And because it was critically important for us to get the right EIS and to study the right set of issues, the town held 2 public scoping sessions and held open for public comment for several weeks our scope for the EIS, which is essentially sort of a list of questions, a list of categories, issues that will be considered in our environmental analysis by the consultants who we have with us for our meeting today. And so, we want to thank everybody who participated in this process. And where we are right now is that we are reviewing the final draft of this scope. So this will then become the list of issues that our consultants will take back and study and come back to us with the draft generic environmental impact statement, EIS. We had been working on this steadily through the months of January and the months of February. We have been delayed several weeks due to the current crisis. However, we now are eager to be able to finalize our scope so that we can have our consultants take the next step and produce the DGEIS. So tonight's scope review and our proposed action, which is to approve this final scope, is administrative in nature and should not be confused by anyone with our approval, with the town board's approval for the form-based code itself. That will happen later in the summer or early fall once we've received the results of the DGEIS, and there will be numerous public hearings that will be held to review the results of that study. So that's to catch everybody up on where we are right now. And the other thing that we wanted to do this evening is we actually invited back Patty Adele from the RES group. Patty and her team at the RES group, Bruce, who's a part of her team, has been putting together the sort of financial analysis and the real estate sort of scan that underlie a lot of the assumptions that we have been making in the form-based code. We invited Patty to come back tonight, specifically to talk with the board about the question of why it's important to continue to move forward with the work that we've been doing on the form-based code in light of everything that's happening right now in terms of the coronavirus crisis and the economic downturn and all of the uncertainty that has led to. So Patty graciously agreed to come and speak with the town board. I had reached out to her initially because I had a lot of questions and concerns. I found it really helpful. And I wanted all of the town board members to also have the opportunity to just sort of hear from her how the work that we're doing has been impacted and why we feel it's important to continue to move forward. So, Patty?
Okay, thank you. I can understand why people would question moving forward, but on the other hand, it seems to be the perfect time to be doing this. Ivy very well identified the overall objectives of the code, and all of that effort is really for a long-term plan. It's not to plan for 6 months from now, a year from now. It's to plan for 10 years from now and how the town is going to look in the long term, 20 years from now. And that's why you're doing something like this, so that you can have a form-based code, which is actually very forward thinking, in order to attract developers that will want to come to Newcastle and Chappaqua to be able to develop the downtown without having to go through what historically in most towns, as well as here, has been a more difficult process of approval. So they tend not to come. So when you have a form-based code, developers will say, oh, I know what I have to do. I know what is expected of me. And I'm going to attempt to do development here because I understand what the timing will be and I have the expectations of what the costs will be. So the other side is the market side. The market isn't exactly what we looked at 6 months ago. Obviously, things have changed because of the COVID situation. No one ever expected this. And you can't predict what a market is going to look like, even when you do a market study 6 months ago. This is extreme. But things change, just like with September 11th, arguably different, but also a drastic impact when people thought, oh my gosh, no one's ever going to go to downtown Lower Manhattan, let alone go to New York again because of the fear. People get over things, markets change. It happens even without a crisis. It happens every 10 years. There's a change in the market. Things happen there way before it was expected. In this situation, what everyone is saying and what we're hearing is the biggest impact will occur in the markets once a vaccine is developed or once a cure is developed for COVID. At that point, I think things will feel more normal and people will view things in a different way. But you have a setup right now so that when that happens, you're in a position where you have the transit. That's not going away. You have a town that has all the assets and the parks and the infrastructure and the buildings. You have roads, you're doing improvements to the streets. All that's being put in place so that when people are ready and developers are ready to invest, it's there. And there's not going to be a question about that. So I think you're in a great position finishing this code now. You've invested all this money and you're through the difficult area. And now you're just getting through, as you said, answering the bigger questions in terms of the impact on the environment. So from my perspective, from a real estate perspective, I think you're still in a good position. And the code will respond to the market, whatever the market is, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, 10 years from now. And you've already established what it is you want to see from that code and how you want your buildings to look. So I think you're in a good position.
Thanks, Patty. I appreciate that. Bonnie, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
So there we go. I found the mute. Not really. It was very well said. I think that the overriding one of the overriding issues again is the fact that you had been planning this already for several years. It was one of your priority projects from your comp plan, which took a couple of years to develop. It was a long-term planning initiative. And the fact that this started last May, you're substantially through the process. And again, I'm not sure what the purpose of putting it on hold really would be. I mean, you've managed to figure out how to do your meetings and we can all talk to each other. We have a good idea of what we're going to be doing to do the environmental impact statement. We put a lot of thought into that. You've had your public sessions for that input. And now we're at the point where we go back and produce the document and we bring it back, and then your schedule can keep going. And as Patty said, it's a long-term objective. So I think that it's upholding what your master planning process has already put forth in no uncertain terms. And I think it's, we're all going to hope for the best on being able to get out on the streets and eat at restaurants and walk and spend time at the parks again. And I'm sure it will happen. So that's all I would add on the big picture.
Thanks, Bonnie. I want to give the town board members an opportunity to ask any questions on this topic of Patty or Bonnie. No questions?
Okay, so this is Jason. I don't have any real questions per se. You know, I guess more comments and maybe have some feedback for it. You know, I'm able to compartmentalize the difference between what's in the form-based code as it's drafted so far and why we need the GIS and why we should go forward with the GEIS. And I think the challenge that many people in our town have is the difference between the two and how much we are studying, knowing that there's some possibility of what's in the form-based code right now not actually coming to fruition. And the difference between the GIS and the form-based code, it's tough for people in our town to really get their arms around, right? So if there's going to be certain height of buildings, we've got plenty of people who look at that and go and say that, their gut says that it's a lot. And so we know that the GIS will figure out whether it is a lot or it is not. And the question becomes, how do we balance for our community what's possible via the code and what's likely via the code versus how the environment of our downtown hamlet will actually be impacted. I think it's a tough, it's tough for people to absorb and understand what the change will really be.
I could make a couple comments on that. I think it will become more apparent when the GIS is out into the public and when you all get to see it as well. Because one of the components of that, what we're analyzing, the proposed action is actually the adoption of a new code, replacing your existing business district coding, zoning code with the new form-based code. The new form-based code contains maps and street sections and a lot of visuals and formulas about how a person who owns land is going to come in and the potential for that development. And I think that the big missing piece that probably is hopefully going to explain all of this is, for our generic EIS, we have to, in order to compare existing and proposed, we have to have a build-out scenario. The build-out scenario will have obviously a lot of assumptions. And we've already come up with that build-out scenario, Eric has, and it has a plan, and it has then a list of assumptions about parking, about open space, about historic properties, about the town parcels, what's staying, what's not staying. But on the private land, in order to compare impacts, it proposes basically the maximum realistic development that could go there, so that you be sure that your environmental documents and your conclusions are not understated, but they're also realistic. So that's, I think, been a point of confusion on the scope, because it's two things. You're analyzing a code, not a specific development project. But in order to analyze it, you do have to assume a certain level of development. So that's not the development that has to go on each particular site, the way it's going to be shown, but it will show that a certain height of buildings is only in a focused area and why. And then the reasons why lower, scale development is shown in other parts and why. So I think when that is out and explained a little better, I think that hopefully will help people to understand. And hopefully.
Can I give it? So here's one possible way that this plays out, right? So based upon the existing densities and heights and things of that nature that are in the form-based code right now, the GIS happens. It determines that there are certain things that need to be remediated, right? Based upon that. And so whether it's remediated or things will be possible, things may not be possible. But that remediation is based upon the density, building heights, and so forth. And so if we were to say, does the GIS say, you know what, if we reduce the density by, again, density meaning how close buildings might be together, how tall they might be, relationships of parking and traffic and all of those pieces. Is the GIS really going to be able to tell us that if you were to reduce it by X%, then yes, this will be a feasible build out, right? Or do we need to go through this process again if we were to change, again, building heights and density of buildings and so forth? Is that enough to go and say the changes that we've made will be able to remediate the deficiencies that were found in the GEIS. I know I wasn't being quite as
No,
straightforward.
I think I know what you mean. So it being a G, the G for generic EIS as well, this build out scenario will be reviewed in each of the topics, in traffic, in parking, in sewer capacity, water capacity, and so forth. And if you go through that analysis and you find out that, you know, thousands of units is way too much, we're never going to have enough sewer for that, or it's going to completely jam up the streets and we don't have enough parking in your draft environmental impact statement, then you're going to have a public hearing on that. You'll have the opportunity before the final EIS to modify the code, to put limits on the development, you know, scenario. As you said, maybe, you know, lower the heights or make some kind of limitations. And then you will also in the final EIS be addressing all of the public comments from the public hearing. So when you end up in the end with your environmental findings statement, it will reflect the level of the impact, the mitigations that were proposed, whether they were sufficient or not. And then that's when you decide whether you're going to adopt the code as is, or you're going to change it. So there are opportunities throughout the process to, this is really the starting point. And this scope is, as Ivy was saying, is more like a table of contents to say, these are the things we definitely want to study. But that doesn't mean if something comes up during the process that it won't be studied later, because you'll have a final EIS to address some of those other issues. I don't know if that helps.
No, I appreciate that. Right, the question then becomes, you know, things like cost, right, and right, things become out of scope that we may need to bring into scope and things of that nature. But yes, that was thank you, Bonnie. I appreciate that.
And there
So
is one, you know, as you know, at the end of through the scope, there's a required section in seeker for alternatives. So some alternatives there, which initially we felt would be important to have, just based on the process we've gone through already with the board and the downtown working group. And an alternative can end up being the proposed action as well.
So I'm mindful of the time, and I want to make sure that we jump into the scope and start to dig into the details about what's there. I also had told Patty that I asked her if she could come for 15 minutes, and of course now it's longer than 15 minutes. But before we let Patty jump off the phone, did anybody else have any questions for Patty about sort of why now is the right time to continue to move forward with the form-based code? I mean, the only thing I would sort of just jump in and add to what we kind of discussed earlier, Patty, just in terms of kind of the call you and I had earlier in the week, or was that last week? I don't know. Everything's running together right now. Was that that really the idea would be to proceed along parallel tracks, right? So not to think that the form-based code is in any way going to be a panacea for an economic downturn that will impact our downtown in a sort of short-term way as a result of the current crisis. But to understand that that is kind of our long-term strategy and our long-term plan, but to simultaneously realize that we need kind of this parallel track where we're thinking about creative ideas for how to help our existing business community, our existing merchants, our existing property owners. And, you know, we have already, you know, much to Lauren Levin's credit, who's been taking the lead on this and working with our fabulous Chapel Millwood Chamber of Commerce. We have already started thinking along those lines about, you know, how can we support that community? But I think it's just kind of in discussion with you, your recommendation was really like, you need to do both, which I really love because it means we just need to work harder. Do more. But I just wanted to throw that in there, that it's not as though we are pursuing this to the exclusion of trying to use our resources and our time to think about how to help our existing business community.
Right. I think that's one of the points we discussed. The other part of it was that you noted that many of those things don't require local funds. It's a lot of state, it's federal. It's really reaching out to the retailers that are there, because when we did our work, part of the issue was how do we strengthen the existing retailers? Now that's even more important. How do we make sure that when this is all over, they can survive and hopefully have this interim difficulty with some support from the federal government and the state government, and you can act as an ombudsman and helping those little retailers that are there to survive this. Because over the long term, the development that's going to take place is going to help them, because more people will be coming in to spend money. But yeah, it is 2 tracks, and you're focusing on the long term with the plan, but because of this whole COVID situation, the short term is just important. And you were focusing on that before, and now it's even more important.
Anyone else questions for Patty before we let her drop off and we start to dig into the scope? Okay, hearing none.
Thank you.
Thanks, Patty. Thank you for
Bye-bye.
joining us. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
So Sabrina, should I turn it over to you to work with Bonnie to walk us through the scope changes?
Sure, I'm happy to kind of introduce kind of where we are and reiterate what you said earlier, Ivy. Bonnie today is going to go through the last version of the scope that you guys have seen, which was dated April 10th, 2020. It was posted last week. There have been changes since then, which really relate to discussions that the town board has had with myself after speaking with the consultant team, really trying to understand whether or not certain public comments were relevant to the GEIS, went in a different direction from the GEIS, or needed to be incorporated into the scope. And so all of the documents up until yesterday have been posted online. Bonnie, I'm going to turn it over to Bonnie. She's going to go through the most recent version dated yesterday based on those conversations that we had last week. But I think that her presentation today will bring everybody up to the same page. And with that, Bonnie, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay. As Sabrina said, I am hoping we can go through the most recent version and not get too confused with comparing the two. I only have like one screen at a time to show. Let me see if I'm going to just try to share the screen. You guys tell me if you can see it.
You're up.
I'm coming over here. All right, now you can see the cover sheet, right?
Nope, it disappeared. We're now looking at your desktop.
Maybe this is the main screen. Hold on. Can you see that?
Yes.
All right,
That's
I was
it.
the wrong screen there. So I'm going to be turning to the side because now I'm looking forward. All right, so this is the scope that Sabrina and I have been through back and forth several different versions and talking of all of these. But basically, the initial scope that we drafted was January 14th. Revised the 25th after Sabrina inserted all of the public comments in writing and in person from the 2 scoping sessions. And then the one that's posted on April 10th was then further revised, sorry, just yesterday, as Sabrina said, based on conversations we've been having and she's been having with you. I'm just going to go through page by page if that's okay, and you guys can ask questions. There weren't a lot of changes in this introduction, the purpose of the scope, the description of the proposed action, which recounts about the comprehensive plan process. required approvals, and again, a description of what a generic environmental impact statement is. These are kind of the required things, table of contents, executive summary. The location of the action, the site being the actual business districts in Chappaqua, which you've all seen the outline of the study area. We'll discuss the land itself, it's public, it's private, how much of each, you know, the lot sizes and so forth. So then we get to the proposed action, which is really the, as I was saying before, the proposed action is the form-based zoning code itself and the act of replacing your existing business districts with this code. It's going to describe a regulating plan and the regulations, which is different than a traditional zoning code. It's going to discuss the development standards, the architecture, the definitions, how it applies to and works into your existing code. And then, of course, the proposed development and review process. And some of these things, you'll see the strikeouts, doesn't necessarily mean we're not including that, but it's kind of a duplication. So a lot of these, you might see that some of it's struck out. It doesn't mean it's totally not included, but it might be mentioned elsewhere, or it's already going to be included. So the build out scenario with the proposed code is what I was referring to before. And obviously with that, we'll have to describe the assumptions. This is what we consider the build out, the maximum build out. There was confusion in the alternative section for a while because we were being asked to do an ultimate maximum theoretical build out. And that really, after talking with Sabrina and Eric, you know, what he's developed really is he feels a maximum build out because it has to be somewhat realistic. It can't be anything everywhere that everyone would build with no constraint. You know what I mean? There's always going to be assumptions that you have made and on all different fronts. So that's why I added the word maximum, because we're considering this to be the maximum build out in order to analyze the impacts on all of the different topics that we're going to go through. So the assumptions will conclude combining of lots or not, parking, the uses on the public lands, and what the realistic development expectations are. So this is an example of where we took some of the wording out that was added from the public comment, but it really, it will capture the same basic information. And within the build out, we'll obviously break it down by discussing the residential. It'll discuss the commercial and the retail, and of course the circulation and the parking. It will also discuss the open space and the infrastructure. One of the required sections in an EIS is the project purpose, need, and benefits. So that's where we'll discuss why you're doing this and the motivation behind it and the objectives. We'll talk about the downtown working group and the market scan report in this section as well. And in addition, we'll talk about public benefits. Then there's a section on required approvals. And then you get into really the meat of an EIS is looking at all the different subject areas, their existing conditions, their anticipated impacts, and proposed mitigation. So the first one of those being land use. The land use studies the study area, but it also will encompass an area around the edge of the hamlet. We actually provided a map because we didn't think it was necessarily appropriate to just say, okay, 50 feet or 100 feet all the way around. The transition areas in some cases are bigger. You know, as you know, there's a separate piece of the business zones that's connected by King Street, so that all, we came up with a large outlined area that we'll study in the land use section. And the map is at the end of the code, so you can visually see it. It's not just a description would have been harder. And then the impacts will talk about the changes basically between the existing and the proposed. To zoning, obviously this is very important. It will use the same transition area. So you're going to see where the study area has the new code in place, and then these adjacent areas, many are residential, there's the train tracks, there's some other, different densities of residential. So that'll be compared and analyzed in this section. This section also in the code will talk about integration with your other chapters, your subdivision, affordable housing, steep slope, wetland permits, and all of those other pieces of the code, and how this new code will fit in with that. You guys can stop me at any time if you have a question. Visual, describing the character of the study area and immediately surrounding neighborhoods, and specifically, again, we did a map so that we, would be clear on what we're talking about, but there are 11 different areas where we thought we should do views from, which these are really going to be a photograph showing the existing condition. What does this view look like now? And then we'll describe using some photo simulations, some cross sections, some narrative as to what the change with the build out scenario would be. So basically, again, it's easier to look at the map, which is at the end, but coming into the hamlet from the bridge, looking north on Greeley, looking south on Greeley, looking toward the intersection with King Street, plus then up at the Bedford Road and King Street area, plus 149 King. Someone's marking on there.
It's probably Sabrina.
Yeah, maybe Sabrina, one of the things we talked about here was the 149 King
It
Street.
is me. I was trying to point it out for folks.
Yeah, because some of the residents, as you know, have come to the meetings and been concerned about the view from that particular complex. And even though it's a private development, we're going to see if we can get photographs from the edge of that area looking out towards North Greeley or the Rite Aid site. So that will be included. And again, this is still in the existing conditions, talking about the general height of the structures in the study area and the character of the rooftops and equipment and so forth. So then in impacts, as I said, we're going to take the same list of, these same 11 spots, and we'll talk about how the character would change with the build out scenario. So even though they're not listed again, it does say that. Obviously, architecture is important in the form-based code and is going to have some quite detailed descriptions. So we'll reiterate that and talk about height as compared to allowed height, existing height, sorry, in the different portions of the study area.
Sorry, we'll make that change there from allowed to existing.
Describe proposed structural height as compared to existing.
Oh, existing allowed height. Got it.
Allowed height. I think it means, even though there might be a 2-story building there, that it might be permitted to be 3.
I see.
So.
Right. Just to clarify, the way that we are measuring height under the proposed code is very different from the way height is measured today. Right. So this is the existing allowed, and you will see in the hamlet buildings that are 2 stories and then buildings that are 3 stories. Those are all under the existing code. It's just the way the measurement is taken. So that the actuality of the heights of the buildings needs to be compared with the way we are measuring height under the proposed code.
Right, I get it. Thanks.
Any other questions on visual? Natural resources. Since it's an existing built-up downtown for the most part, most of these particular sections will be using existing available sources, existing mapping. Oh boy, I might have to sign into my system again. So we talk about geology and soils. We will talk about vegetation and wildlife. We will talk about, including in that vegetation section, will be the relation to the tree preservation code. Talk about wetlands, water courses, ponds that are existing and what those where those constraints are on the site. In addition, we'll talk about steep slopes, which there are. And in each of these sections, as I said, we'll talk about the tree ordinance, we'll talk about wetlands and water courses, other chapters and how they relate to any potential changes in the code. So then we move on to infrastructure and utilities. The main categories being stormwater and water supply. Flooding goes under stormwater. Sanitary and wastewater, and obviously we're going to be talking with the town engineer and getting all of the base data on the recent capacities and so forth. And then the fourth category in this section is energy use, electricity, natural gas, the other kind of utilities. So we will touch on each of those, including the natural gas connections and the situation with Con Ed and 5G and all of that. We didn't put a whole separate category for green building per se. There will be discussion about how energy efficiency and green building will be encouraged in the code, but that was taken out as a whole separate category, although we will put some discussion you see in here in the mitigation about green building standards and how they might, as a separate issue, be integrated into the town's initiatives. Anything else on those sections I just went over? All right. Traffic, pedestrians, and parking. In here again, discussing the existing conditions, the proposed impacts, and the mitigation. First, we talk about the road system. Then we talk about the non-vehicular, the bus, train, bikes, ridership, and all of that, and the transit system. And then using the trip generation standard methodologies, we have a list of intersections that we had actually come up with last fall, and fortunately, I think had already gone out and done the traffic counts. Because in normal times, you don't want to do it during the holidays, you don't want to do it when school is out. So we had collected this information last fall. As you can see, King Street is already being analyzed quite a bit, and we felt that adding these additional intersections, which were not going to particularly add to the depth of knowledge that was going to help you make your decision. In addition to that, being the fact that we had not gathered this information, we probably basically have to extrapolate. If it does become important to add back in as we go through the process by next fall or over the summer, even if we're going into the final EIS, and that really becomes an issue, you could look at doing traffic counts on these other intersections. Describing the character of the streets and the streetscape improvements and the new traffic light. We'll evaluate accident data from the police and other available sources. The parking, again, now that the commuter lot is really not being used as much and in any way the same as it was prior to a couple months ago, we're going to collect the available information that we can and describe parking restrictions, districts, the existing facilities, but it won't be we were not going to go out and do a separate utilization study that analyzes in as depth as we may have before this, because we don't want to hold up the report, and we feel like what we have, we can provide enough information to do the analysis. And then basically, as with most of the other sections, you're going to analyze the same factors and look at the build-out scenario and the anticipated impacts for all those different aspects. The traffic on the streets, the pedestrians, the train, and the buses and parking with the new code. We took out construction because this is not really analyzing the construction, it's analyzing a potential future maximum build out, and the construction will all be, it's not a construction project per se. So that was another reason why some of the public comments were removed from here, just because it wasn't really what this is going to be studying. It's a generic studying a proposed law. It's not a site-specific development project. Cultural resources, historic and archaeological. We'll make sure that we capture the historic resources in the hamlet and the potential impact to those. Community facilities and services, sort of like infrastructure. It's talking about a level of service and capacities in the schools, the police, the fire protection, the public works, open space and recreation, community center, and the library, which is not just a idea. I mean, most of those facilities are right in the downtown. They're physical facilities plus the impact. We'll study the impact that this build out with the maximum level of either residential or commercial new uses that come into town, how they'll be affected, and the new population. Similarly, socioeconomics, demographics, in other words, again, studying the population through the build-out scenario as the tool for analyzing that. Property taxes, employment, existing and proposed. We'll look at vacancies based on the information we can get from the town. And then we'll talk about the different types of housing. Another one of your comprehensive plan goals to have housing other than single family detached, and then also mentioning affordable. And then the impacts, we'll talk about the cost to educate the school children in addition to the number of school children and the property taxes. Employment and new commercial space as well. Hazardous materials, again, just scanning the databases and understanding where any potential conditions and constraints might be in the hamlet and what that means to the build out, if there's areas that can't be built on or whatever the constraint might be. And then air quality and noise, again, air quality and noise often relate to traffic, but not always. We're going to talk about noise generators, delivery and loading, and talk in general about what a new level of development would mean to the hamlet in terms of air and noise. We took out construction. Any questions? So in the alternatives, I put a few notes in the margins just to be sure we were on the same page in describing these. So I'll just go through it if that's okay. we have ended up with, I think, four alternatives. So there's proposed action. And the proposed action will be compared to these alternatives in a matrix in the back of the report. The no action is required by seeker in all EISs. And it's a discussion of this situation right now. If you took a snapshot, April 2020. So no new development, not envisioning new development. The alternative B, build out under existing zoning, is the potential if economics were not a factor and people all could build out to their maximum using the existing zoning. So that's why it's a little different than the no action. However, as we know, required parking is a limitation in many cases, so that will be addressed. And this is a new scenario that wasn't really envisioned before, and it is different than the no action. So it will be a real good tool for you to be able to compare. This is how it is now. If we don't make any changes, even if everyone could do what they wanted on their parcels and weren't constrained by the development process or finances, this is what could be built there. So that would be a good comparison. And then we're also doing a comparison. This is, I know this is kind of a messy page, but here, this is alternative C. It's the same as the proposed action, except with no development on the public lands, on the municipal lands down at the southern end of, where the town hall and the rec field and all of the parking lots. So it really is going to reflect the private development full build out scenario. And then D, the last one, is going to be a full build out with just a height reduction to a maximum of 4 stories. So it's going to be the same as the proposed action, but in the areas where there were 5 stories permitted, there will only be 4 stories permitted. So we'll do a grid that'll show that'll be this much less residential units, this many fewer people, this many fewer cars, etc. So that'll be, again, those 4 alternatives will be compared to the proposed action. And then this section, these again are headings that are all required in every EIS. Significant adverse environmental impacts that can't be avoided, gross inducement, effects on conservation and energy resources, and irreversible commitment of resources. And then the code, I don't know if the maps are attached to it or they're not. The appendices obviously showing the technical reports that will go with this. Way too much, more than you needed to know, but that's where we are. And go back to any particular page if you want me to.
Thanks, Bonnie. Thanks for walking us through the changes. I know we had some questions from folks who were in the audience, as it were, tonight. Just before we go to those, I want to check with all of the town board members. Do any of the town board members have any questions about what Bonnie's discussed with regard to the scope? Just jump in if you do. Sorry, I'm trying to scroll through my screen to see everybody, but okay. Oh, now I can see everybody again. Okay, so then we had several questions that came in from Margaret Ferguson. Lyle, can you help us get connected to?
I can, or do you want, hang on just a second. She has her hand raised, so I'm gonna allow her to talk. Margaret should be able to be on now.
Hello.
Hello, we can hear you.
Okay. Sorry to have interrupted the presentation, but this is a new format for me. It's a certain amount of learning curve going on.
No. I was just sorry to cut you off. You had a lot of questions and I was trying to read your questions and listen and
That's fine.
I got overwhelmed.
Okay,
thanks for waiting.
So I'm confused. Is the detailed analysis in the scoping document going to be a maximum 100% build out now? Because the document I have April 10th document, and it keeps saying a realistic, I have to find the exact wording, but I think it says something like realistic build out scenario.
Yeah.
And then at the end as an alternative, which now appears to be deleted in the April 10th draft. But again, I'm trying to work between something I don't have and something I have in front of me.
Right.
Is the build out scenario that's going to be addressed in detail a maximum 100% build out scenario?
Do you want me to answer that? It's yes, I would say the answer is yes. The first round of the scope did have an alternative with a maximum, ultra maximum theoretical build out, but the more we talked about it, it was not going to be that much different. And it really was not realistic at all to think that that level of build out would ever occur for many different reasons. So therefore, we eliminated it as an alternative, and I think everyone on the board and the public will feel more comfortable knowing that the proposed action it's realistic, but it's a maximum, it's aggressive. So
Okay.
it's to show what really could happen, but there'll be a series of assumptions that will be listed and you'll be able to see how we came up with it.
But when you say a series of assumptions, that's where I get a little confused. Is if you have, I got to use an example. If you can put one area that has 4-story buildings and it can be built to a certain size of the property line, is that going to be the assumption that it's going to be 4 stories and built within the maximum build out to the property line, or is it going to be something less?
Yes, no, it will be like that, but there'll also be assumptions that, the Bell School will remain a school and that Horace Greeley House will stay in the same place. I mean, it's not going to be
And recreation field will be recreation field.
As a field, right. It's not going to show that kind of ultra level of,
Is it going to use a full build out of the commuter lot?
Right, but the build out, the plan itself is a mapped, shows mapped areas that only can be developed to certain levels. So that's really what this will do. That's what's different about this code, I think.
Well, I guess will it show a full build out of a change of the commuter lot to, I don't want to choose the wrong word.
Yes.
No, it will. It will.
Okay.
Yes, it absolutely will. It will, because right now the proposed code identifies the area within the train station and the commuter parking lots as being able to be built out.
Right. So when you said that for example, Rec Field, isn't Rec Field in the same rezoned area?
It is, however, there is policy that exists through the comprehensive plan that the community does not want to get rid of recreation field.
So to understand which areas in the rezoned lots, when you take the map of the rezoned areas and you look at it, to understand which areas on the map show that they're being rezoned and potentially developed are being cleaved out of development, you have to go back and understand other documents and other history to understand why that's happening, such as with Rec Field.
No, it will all be in there. But that's a good example of how that parcel will be shown as based on previous historic policy and on the downtown working group and on public input. Rec Field will stay as Rec Field and it will not be shown as a potential for 4-story buildings.
Right. The GEIS will provide explanation for the assumptions. So in the event that the build out analysis doesn't show build out on Rec Field, as Bonnie is saying, the GEIS will include why it is not being shown as part of the build out. so that all of the information is in one place and the assumptions can be clearly understood and interpreted in relation to the map and the plan.
Then why rezone rec field? Why rezone?
Because right now recreation field is not a separate parcel and its use is not affiliated with its zoning. It's currently zoned, I think, for business business retail zoning. And right now the town does not have open space zoning.
All right. Well, I think it's better to do, in my opinion, it's better to do a absolute 100% maximum build out, and to show people, because my experiences, people are having, well, first of all, things have changed, and as we all know, in the past, 4 or 8 weeks, but people were having a very hard time understanding what this project was about, and it's a lot of words. I don't mind reading a lot of words, but it's the conception, the images, the renderings, the photographs, the graphics, etc., are essential to explaining to people what this could look like and where a building might be and how tall it might be, because people are not understanding it. They're making a lot of assumptions of their own that are just incorrect. And so I don't know that people have.
And that is what we will be doing, but putting forward something that's unrealistic, that would never happen, like building 4-story buildings on rec field, is not going to further anyone's understanding.
Well, I understand rec field. I don't know if there's really another example. I mean, I guess the community center and I guess Bell School. I don't know if there's anything else that's going to remain unchanged, essentially. I mean, the community center, I gather, I should say Greeley House, but I gather those aren't going to be built on, but I don't know for certain. But my point is that the imaging is because originally.
Wait, no, I think we agree with you. I think we're all in agreement with you that that's what we want.
The imaging is essential. I don't know how. I am very concerned because I don't know how anybody can. The socioeconomic ground is so different now and so unstable. I don't know how any sense of where any of us are going can be arrived at this point. I do think that this is very something this radically changed is a very I don't know. It's a concerning thing to me. I wasn't a fan of. I felt the existing zoning could be changed because I think that this proposed plan is very developer friendly, and I think things can happen where you don't see it now, but you end up with something you didn't want because a lot of power is shifted to developers. But in the future going forward, okay, if you're going to do 100% build out of the 100% rendering, that's better than making assumptions where there is not 100% rendering or 100% build out assumption. I do small business law, and I'm in contact with 30 different businesses in New York, Westchester, and not one of them is has gotten any funding from the government. Not one.
I'm sorry.
I just want to say one thing. They're not sure that they're going to be here within a month.
I appreciate what you're saying. We have other people who are raising their hand as well, and I want to make sure that we get to everyone. And we have a limited amount of time for this. Do you have any other questions with regard to the scope document?
Okay, maybe I do. Give me a second.
Okay, well, while you're looking.
I got them. Just give me 1 second. I do think that the loss of the density, I know in the environmental aspects, it talks about different things, but I'm not sure that the loss of the visual loss, the loss of air rights, the loss of open space, do you see that as being encompassed in the extent of this study? Because there's a lot more density going on, so it's really a loss of open air.
I guess, are you referring to basically building heights of buildings that aren't there now?
Yes.
That's certainly going to be analyzed.
So the I don't know how it looks when you do it, but it accounts for the taller buildings and parking lots, no open space in the commercial center and the downtown, that type of thing.
Yeah, and there'll be a model that will show that. And I know you mentioned the graphics. Obviously, this is very important because one of the main aspects of this is what is it going to look like in the future, and having this vision carried out is what part of what this is all about. So
Okay.
that'll
And
be-
also in terms of finances, I mean, I'm confused again whether this includes this type of study includes financial aspects. I can see that in the draft I have, there's some mention of different financial impacts. But in terms of whether the town has to hire somebody to implement, to enforce and implement the zoning, is that part of the study too? I mean, all we have is a building inspector right now, one man.
Yeah, there will be discussion of the
We have two.
implementation of the zoning. Yeah.
Well, I guess we have two sometimes. I mean, I know we have them from time to time, but is that part of the financial study, the fiscal study?
It's not necessarily part of the fiscal study in terms of how much will it cost to hire people, but the proposed development process will be part of this and will be described. I don't know, Sabrina, if you want to add to that.
Okay.
No, I think that's that is part of the GEIS, is really to explore what the anticipated workload will be in relation to town offices to a certain extent.
Okay. Okay, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
So Lyle, I think we have a gentleman, Doug.
Yeah, I think Doug Hamilton's next to the list. I'll just set him up to talk.
That'd be great. Thanks.
Actually, here we go. Nope, Doug has an old version of Zoom, so he cannot talk.
Oh, okay. So Doug's question, Bonnie, I will read to you.
Yeah.
Doug's question was, it seems appropriate not to assess actual construction impacts, i.e. truck traffic, dirt, noise, etc., but should construction phasing of development on town-owned land be studied?
Again, I think the town-owned land actually being developed is a next step. This is really to look at the potential build out, but not necessarily go into the various aspects of what the construction project might be. Because there are so many possibilities. I don't know, Sabrina, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I also think that the construction impacts is kind of a second level. I think the first step is the zoning. The next step is the town board needs to consider in tandem with the community as to whether or not they want to change anything about town-owned land. And, you know, as part of that process and looking at potential development projects that are consistent with zoning, then you would examine the actual construction impacts, the construction phasing, that type of thing. This is a higher level of zoning, not necessarily the details as to how a particular property will be developed and those impacts. I don't know if that helps.
So Doug, if you have further questions about that, please feel free to type in another question for us.
I think we got Warren Gottlieb next. And he typed his in on the Q&A as well.
Are you able to connect him with the town board?
I will try. Hang on. Warren, take your, if you're on your phone, take your phone off mute with *6. If you're on your computer or on your computer, you can just click on mute. He may have left. He said he had to leave.
Okay, I'll read Warren's question. It says, I was wondering if the town board would consider putting off voting on the resolution approving the latest version of the scope so that residents can have a reasonable opportunity to review the last two red lines, the one in the packet and the 420 version being discussed tonight, and determine if it reflects their input during the drafting process. Given the current crisis that we are living through and the fact that New York is on pause, I believe this would be the right way to go. I don't know if anyone on the town board wants to respond to that.
Well, I mean, I think what we have done, in the more recent past, is when something's up for discussion, we haven't generally voted on it the same night. And I know it is on the agenda to do that tonight, but given that residents are asking questions tonight and maybe haven't had a chance to review the draft that we're talking about tonight, I would be okay putting it off one more week till our town board meeting next week instead of at the work session.
I agree with Lisa too. Is putting it off for a week like a big deal? I mean, are there negatives to putting it off for a week, Sabrina and Bonnie?
So a question I've got is,
No, I don't think so.
is to what benefit? Right? So we have, we've, under kind of a different town board starting in January, we've had, lots of, several outreach sessions. We have discussed this at other town board meetings. We've gone, while there are some changes in the red line version, they are not massively impactful. I think they were thought through by our consultants, by our town planner, and even by our town board as well already. I would feel differently if we were talking about the actual plan itself, or later the actual form-based code itself, or later later steps before we adopt a form-based code. I'm not sure there's a lot more input to be had that hasn't already been stated, and that hasn't already been reviewed by most of the people on this call.
So Jason, to me, the biggest issue is not kind of all the things that have been brought up at our scoping document sessions, but really, to me, the biggest issue is making sure everyone is understanding the actual scope of what's being studied, not in terms of traffic, but in terms of full build out versus realistic build out versus current, zoning. And I think, we certainly spent a decent amount of time talking about that this past week. So I just wanted to give the public enough time to make sure they're understanding it. They're asking any questions with regard to that. I don't think that was really brought up so much during the actual public sessions with regard to scoping. I think people were more focused on what else should be included.
So I'll jump in. I don't have a problem with delaying the vote to move forward with this until next week. I think that's fine. I do, however, I would sort of echo some of Jason's thoughts with regard to, I don't know how much is going to change substantively between the draft that we're reviewing tonight versus the decision to move forward with it next week. I haven't heard anything tonight that would make me think there's going to be a change to this draft before we move it forward. But I also, on the other hand, don't feel a need to push it forward, having been, at least part of the reason why it was delayed for the 8 weeks that it's been delayed. So, so an extra week doesn't feel like it's.
So that's just the one thing I wanted to add, is that if things had proceeded as they had in February, we would have voted on this on the first week in March. And we put it off just as a matter of course and courtesy and convenience. But I just don't want people to be under the false impression that this document is more than it is. This is the outline of things that we're going to study that help form the basis and inform the draft generic environmental impact statement. And at that point, all of these comments will be included and the public will have an opportunity to decide how they want to move forward. But I just, I mean, ultimately, you guys will, next week doesn't make a difference one way or the other, but I don't want to give this false impression that this document is in fact the draft generic environmental statement. It's not. This is just the beginning of us being able to form it. So that's my only
I want to
cautionary
second,
word on it.
I want to second what Jill is, I'm not lighting up, there I am. I
There
want
I
to
am.
second what Jill is, I want to second what Jill is saying. I think we should have no false impressions here. We have to fish or cut bait and move forward. There'll be people who are pleased, there'll be people who aren't pleased. I think everyone on the board at least has done their due diligence. And I believe that people in the community have an ample opportunity, but in the whole scheme of this, I agree, 1 week is not going to make a difference, but they should have no illusions of what's going on. But
Absolutely.
we'll be listening for the next week.
Yeah,
I mean, beyond the next week, pardon me. But for this
Yeah,
purpose.
I hear you guys. I hear Lisa's point too. I guess I don't know what way we can go and get the community to be knowledgeable about those points that Lisa brought up, right? And I think that's the key, right? So the idea was for the community, and I'm kind of restating what I think Lisa said.
Well, no, Jason, I think just to jump in, I mean, I think what Lisa's saying is not the broader point about how can we educate the community on the form-based code. I mean, that's a separate conversation that we've been having and we will continue to have. I think, Lisa, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm sure you will. The way I understood what you were saying was just that, people have been not necessarily paying attention to this as tightly and as closely as they were back in February. These documents got posted to our, our e-code, and it was in the agenda, and that got posted on Friday, but maybe people weren't quite following it the way that they were 2 months ago. So, if they didn't see that until today, they didn't read it until today, let's give them a couple of extra days so that they've read it and seen it.
Exactly.
Sounds good.
All good. Okay, great. We'll put it over.
All right,
Okay.
awesome.
All right, well, let Sabrina
Thank
and
you,
Bonnie
guys.
go. Thank you guys so much.
Thanks, Sabrina. Thanks, Bonnie.
Happy planning board meeting.
Bye. Thanks, Bonnie. Thanks.
Thanks. Why should we be the only people having fun, right? So I see that Ike and the chief are actually on with us. If you guys don't mind, we're going to just flip down to the recreation fee schedule and actually a discussion of something that's come up in the parks regarding a recommendation from the rec commission and the chief, who was
Wait,
here a second ago.
Bill, I think we just lost. Oh, there he is. Is he coming back? There
There
he
he
is.
is. All right. Chief, you with us? Connecting to audio. Chief, can you hear us? I'm thinking no.
Not yet.
Ike, can you unmute?
Absolutely.
Great. All right, let's just see if we can wait for the chief 2 seconds.
Yeah.
Lyle, if you're listening,
Yeah, his audio is
he's just
starting
having
to
a
come
little
in.
trouble here.
He's connecting to audio now.
Okay, great. Thank you. I don't know what to do with that, Lyle.
They're up in upstate New York. They don't have the internet yet.
Hey, chief.
Nope, he lost it. Jeez.
Maybe he can dial in
Call.
through a
Can you
phone.
Oh, let me text him.
Technology.
Ike, you want to start talking and let me get the chief on?
Yeah, Jill, you're gonna have to text. He's not even connected here.
Yeah, we can get started. I don't know where the town board wants to start. If it wants to discuss the fees first and then the dog leash, or
Yeah.
All right, why don't you discuss fees? Yeah.
okay. So this was basically in response to the requests that we get for the walks downtown, mainly in Chappaqua, but we kind of wanted to cover all the bases. And while we were working on it, I also wanted to put something in place for our parks, because like last year we had, I don't know, I'm going to call it a bike-a-thon that used Gedney as one of their stops last year. It was supposed to be small, just a 10 by 10 tent. They were using it as a rest stop. It turned into a total disaster. I mean, it was over 100 bikers coming through. They clogged up the park for the day. So things like that, I just want to kind of give us a fee schedule so that if we have organizations come to us and want to use one of our parks, it's mainly going to be Gedney. But for an event that would have, and I called it a significant impact on the park, meaning that it would affect traffic on 120. It would affect access to the park. It would affect parking there. We would have to bring in staff to kind of regulate the flow of traffic, make sure litter, garbages, bathrooms are all taken care of for the day. So that's what that park facility rental fee is based on. I know there were some questions about Pavilion Rentals, which we get all the time. Whether it's a small birthday party or a large birthday party, that to me isn't a significant impact. If there's 30, 40, maybe even 50, I mean, that might have some effect on parking in the back, but it's not going to affect the entire park and the operation of the park for that day. So that's where we would delineate, and it would be a conversation between the chief and I as to what would cross that threshold.
And Ike, just a quick question. And you are envisioning that this applies both to residents who want to use it for those purposes and also to somebody from outside of town who wants to use it?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. And even if it was, I know Chief gets most of the requests, but for the walks that people want to do in town, it's an impact on the area for that day or the extent of that walk. We should have town staff involved outside of the police department. So I feel like my department, my staff should be involved in the planning and the logistics and making sure that all the X's and O's are covered for that event for the day. Just that's the way I'm used to operating. I just think we should have our hands on any of the events that are going on in town, especially when they're not technically sponsored by the town. So, these costs or these fees would just cover our staff cost for the event and the processing fee and whatever the chief, whatever police officers they have to have for the day. So that was the basis for putting this together. Just so we have a guideline when someone called, we would have, it wouldn't be 3 or 4 conversations figuring out what we wanted to do or if we should charge anything or how the event should run that day. It would be a clean pipeline through my department and working with the chief. I don't know if that kind of makes sense. I feel like I rambled a little bit there, but.
No, I think we when we talked about it, the last meeting, the one before, time seems to fly. The only question that I had was to just make sure that it wasn't that you had guidelines by which you were going to go make that decision, because the legislation didn't seem to have guidelines as to when you'd enforce those fees and when you wouldn't. Yeah, that was it.
Right, and I don't know if I have a specific checklist in mind. That's why I did kind of leave it general. I think a significant impact when you see it. Just like I said, birthday parties that we get at the park all the time would not be an issue. It's the larger scale, and we haven't had anybody really come in for that yet. But what happened with the bike group last year, I want to avoid happening going forward. And and if it's something that they still want to move through with, well, then at least we will be covering our costs when we make sure it's safe for the day, and try to minimize the impact at any point that we can.
So, Ike, would these fees affect existing historic events from years past, like the Chappaqua Children's Book Festival or Wine Around Town or Art Around Town? Would these folks have to cover those fees?
I think the way you would look at it is whether or not it's a town-sponsored event.
And so they would not affect town-sponsored events.
Right. So if it's in partnership with the town, then there would be no fee, because that would be our part of our gig as far as co-sponsoring the event.
Okay. And so that's traditionally the book festival. that's flying around town. Trying to figure out, there were a couple of other things. Oh, Lisa mentioned Relay for Life. That was another one that had come up with, and again, that's on school property. So that would not be affected, nor would it be covered. And I think we tend to help out anyway without charge.
The Strawberry Festival.
Chief, you'd have to,
I don't know how much
weigh in on that?
I haven't seen that.
Yeah.
Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So I had to go from my computer to my phone. I apologize. My computer wasn't.
I was wondering why we had two of you. It was interesting.
More the merrier, right?
So, how do we handle the Strawberry Festival? How does that, how would that be affected by these park fees? Do we?
I get you. Who actually sponsors the Strawberry Festival? It's not town related at all?
It's the church.
Church of St. Mary, the Virgin.
And it's only on church grounds too.
Yeah, so
yes, but there is traffic impact throughout town, and there's additional officers that we do, and I don't think we do anything else about that.
I think, I don't know. I don't want to be kind of told. I mean, it's on church property. I don't know, Chief. I don't know what the impact is with you. Like, do you have to direct traffic out there? I mean, is it?
We usually add an officer or two, but I wouldn't want to make them subject to that.
And that goes back to my only question is to make sure that it's not arbitrary as to what guidelines you want to use for it. I'm perfectly comfortable with Chief Carroll and Ike deciding what meets a threshold. Just make sure it's not arbitrary.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, just way of when I've had this sort of stuff in the past and my future lives, it's if it was a town-sponsored event, the fees weren't, the fees were waived. If it wasn't, then depending on it was. But it also always kind of got muddled too as to who was actually throwing the event. But I don't know.
Well, I'm not sure that we can. I mean, I think we have to have guidelines. I think people need to know what it is that they should expect.
Right. So, and I don't know what outside of it being use that town sponsored, even if it's just we're saying we're sponsoring the event and that's the extent of it, that might help waive that fee structure for that organization. I don't know too much about the Strawberry Festival and how that operates.
Right. It's not town sponsored. It's not on town property. I mean, how does it? Why would it be subject to fees? It doesn't cost addition. It does, but it's something we've always provided just because of the volume of people in town. We just help facilitate.
Yeah, it really doesn't fall within the parameters that we're looking at here. He's right on both issues. It doesn't affect. It's not held on town property, and it's not a town event.
Yeah, same with the church summer festival.
Right.
Exactly right. And the same thing with Relay for Life. It's not on.
It's
not a town event. It's not on town property. So.
Yeah. But I think having this structure with the fees would be good for us going forward. And the chief and I working together on it, I think would be the way to, and I would like our department involved. Just when people want to do walks and things like that in town, I think we should be involved in the planning process for that.
So maybe what we'll do is we'll speak with Nick about just tightening up the language. So I think it's very important that everybody's crystal clear about when this applies. And it shouldn't just be on but not that we don't trust you, but it should be apparent as to that it's being uniformly applied. That's that's the key.
Okay.
Very good, Jill. I'll get back a call tomorrow and start that discussion.
Okay. Thank you. All right. So since we have Chief here, let's talk about dogs in the park. And because the Chief always is armed, I'm going to let him start the conversation.
Because why?
Because you're always armed.
Oh, yeah. I'm not carrying now. I'm in the kitchen. So.
Okay.
So, Samantha Stratz is our new animal warden and park enforcement officer, and she's been assigned to Gedney since, I guess, right after the pandemic. And she's had a lot of opportunity to be out there and see what's going on. And frankly, she's doing a really good job. She sent a letter to myself and Lieutenant Dumser just for her take of what's going on in Gedney. And I forwarded to Ike, who forwarded to the Rec Commission, and which precipitated a further conversation with them. They actually liked some of her independent thought. And because of that, they asked me and Ike to sit in, or me to sit in on the Rec Commission meeting last Thursday. During that meeting, the concern came up about Gedney and lack of social distancing, and the concern with dogs off the leash on the trails, and that it was creating an issue because there was so many more people and more dogs, and it was difficult to maintain social distancing there. They also mentioned Whippoorwill on weekends because that seems to be bad, but those are the two main parks they focused on. During that conversation, they decided to make a suggestion that during this emergency time, the town, the legislation get changed, that dogs are required to be on leashes when in the parks. So that's kind of how we got here.
Right. So one of the things that we talked about was the proposal from the Rec Commission came in as across the board prohibition, all parks. And so the initial conversation was, is that overly broad, considering that we are aware of the fact of problems only in two parks, Gedney daily, but Whippoorwill only on the weekends.
Right.
And was there a way for us to accomplish what the Rec Commission and what you and Samantha were seeking to accomplish, but not be so overly broad in our application of this prohibition?
Yeah, I don't have an objection. I guess, I like a consistent message because it's easier to enforce, and it's easier for people not to make excuses. Oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know this time frame. So when I meant
the less bullet points, the better.
Right.
Kind of.
Right. No, understood.
So,
but I think Gedney has presented a unique set of problems that isn't necessarily apparent anywhere else.
Yes,
I certainly.
Gedney always has a unique set of problems.
Yeah.
It's just the traffic there. It's great.
Yeah. I certainly don't have an objection, personally or professionally, if it's just Gedney and even Whippoorwill, a designation for weekends. I'd prefer not to do it, but those two, I wouldn't object to that. The time frames, I understand the concern. If the board was set on doing times, I'd push it out to 6 just because it's later, unless people are there. But it's an easier message for us to get along that, hey, in Gedney, all dogs have to be on a leash. And Whippoorwill on the trail, or all dogs need to be on a leash. The suggestion about less than 6 foot or 6 foot for the length, I think that was great.
So I don't hike at Gedney because Gedney has always been too crowded to hike at. But I do hike every day with my dog. And I can tell you that I was in Glacier today. I was in Whippoorwill yesterday. The day before that, I was in Warburg. The day before that, I was in Sunny Ridge. None of these parks, with the exception of Whippoorwill on the weekends, none of these parks have an overcrowding problem that and like I said, I'm in these parks regularly. So I don't see an issue with any of these parks with the exception of Gedney. And so, my personal preference would be to focus on Gedney alone, and to make this, to designate this as a family park, a place that families can go and hike with their kids without the expectation of encountering dogs on the trails, given the high usage at that particular park. That's my feeling. If we wanted to set hours around that, I think that before 8 a.m. or after 6 p.m. dogs can be there off leash would be acceptable. I'd also be okay with making that a leash required.
Required, yeah.
But I have a lot of experience in the other parks, and I just don't see the same need that I see at Gedney.
And have we not had a problem at any other parks on the weekends?
Nope. Whippoorwill has been getting overcrowded.
I can tell you this. I was the information I got about Whipple was from the rec commission. So I do not have any active or current information on that. Gedney, I am aware of, and I think I would be happy with Gedney, and, you know, just all dogs on leash in Gedney at all times. That would be my preferred way to go. It's just one message, right? It's just, you know, she can be there as they're walking back or coming with the dog. Hey, just so you know, all dogs are on leash, you know, until the pandemic's over or the board decides to lift it.
And that would just be at all times, right? There would no time parameter. It would
Correct.
just be
That
all the
would
time.
be my preference. Yes.
You know, and maybe we just put the public on notice that if there starts to be a problem at these other parks, that restriction will then be moved to other parks as well. But right now, only confine it to Gedney.
Yeah, right. We should probably follow up with the code red or in the e-newsletter as well, that this has happened or happened, you know, and get that out there.
Yeah, because my only thought is, you know, so everyone says, okay, well, then we can't go with our dogs to Gedney. We're all going to now go to, you know, another park, and then we could end up with issues there. So that's why maybe just kind of put it on notice that we will evaluate other parks, you know, during this pandemic as well.
Well, and that's a good point. But with that being said, I guess there's a silver lining that most of our other parks have parking for maybe 10 cars.
Right. That's actually, that's the problem that's happening at Whippoorwill. The problem at Whippoorwill isn't the dogs. The problem
is the
at Whippoorwill
parking.
is the size of the parking lot. And then people need to, you know, the message that I think needs to go out to people is, if that parking lot's full at Whippoorwill,
move on.
don't go parking on the street. Like, people are parking all the way up Whippoorwill Road, blocking that lane because there isn't enough of a, you know, sort of edge of the road to shoulder, that's the word, to park safely. So, you know, I think Whippoorwill's definitely a problem on the weekends. I agree with that, but I don't know if the problem is a dog problem or if the problem is an overcrowding problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the lots at all those parks are not, I mean, they're small. You can't even see they're not big, they're small. So, you know, that kind of limits the traffic at those other places as well. But there will certainly be some pushback with this. And Chief, I know Samantha will certainly will have her hands full.
Yeah. Well, she's just a radio
maybe
away.
We could see about, maybe we could see about putting up a sign in the, you know, front of Gedney that says, you know, notice.
Do we know, is Sinorama still open?
I don't know. You'd have to give them a call.
Okay. Just gotta say, I would have a couple yard signs, the Coroplast signs made, just to put throughout the park. You know, we're going to have to get some signage out there somehow. Not that people read signs, but at least we can put them out there to point to them.
So Jill, the town board would need to adopt a resolution then tonight. What would be the specific language we would like? Modifying the park rules.
I thought,
wouldn't we do this as an executive order under the state of emergency?
If we did that, we then need to get it renewed every 5 days, get approval from the health department. And we do have the ability to control our own regulations. So if we just adopt a new rule, I think that would be sufficient.
Oh, we don't actually have to put that to a public hearing and everything. Okay, yeah.
That's correct. Yes, it can be done by resolutions of the park rules. It's not a local law. It's in the appendix to the town code that can be modified by resolution or by local law. Given the circumstances, I would suggest a local law is appropriate.
And Nick, could you amend it just to say it's in Gedney?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
I think
okay,
that's
so
what I'm feeling.
Can you, let me just get Nick that,
Here's my question. Does it have to go back to the rec commission? Because did they adopt it first?
I think in these situations, the town board has the authority to do so, and you do have some guidance that is being given by the rec commission. So if you want to implement it now, I think you could do so. If you want to wait a week, then you can get the rec commission's approval.
I don't think we want to wait a week. I mean, you know.
Right. So I would recommend you have their thoughts and guidance on this.
I think so.
They should continue to advise us if this continues to be an issue. They're the rec commission. If the action that we've taken did not go far enough and they continue to believe it's a problem, they should come back to us and we'll talk about doing more.
I think that's fair enough.
So
So,
this will only be at Gedney, and what would be the specific limitation?
I think it's dogs are
that
on
no
leash at
dog
all
shall be
times.
permitted to run in Gedney Park on
Yeah.
Gedney Park Trail at any time without a leash not exceeding 6 feet. The resolution that you prepared, Nick, I
Yep.
think is fine, other than the fact that instead of it saying any park,
Gedney, okay, then there's no time restrictions, understood.
no.
Okay, great, I'll prepare that and send that to the board. Tonight, now.
Okay.
All right,
All right.
excellent.
Yeah. Terrific. Thank you, guys. I very much appreciate you coming.
Yeah, no, thank you. Appreciate it.
And does anyone have any other, so we'll clean up the language on the park, the rec fee schedule, and we'll present that to you for next week. Okay, Mike, that'll work?
Yeah, that's great. Oh, thank you.
Great, okay. Great, and the other thing, fine. All right, we have two other things to talk about, but I do see that Rand has been waiting patiently. Do you guys want to do sludge removal at Millwood Water Treatment Plant, or do you want to move right into leaf blowers? Your call.
Is this my call? Did I?
Let Rand go, he's here.
Yeah, Jason, that's your fault. You texted me. Should we go to leaf blowers?
Let's go to leaf blowers.
I'm here for leaf blowers.
Don't forget about the
Thumbs up. Oh, did I just choose Rand over the chief? Oh, God.
No, it's fine.
No.
It's fine.
Help me out, people.
No, Chief isn't here for any, wait, Chief, are you here for something else?
You know what? I'd like to sit down on leaf blowers because I figure that's going to impact me eventually.
Yeah, same here. I'm gonna stick around and listen to that if you don't mind.
All right, fine. Okay, I can't believe that if it was sludge, you wouldn't stay here, but fine. Rand,
It's
what's
me
the
over
next
sludge.
50-50 shot on the
fine.
sludge.
I feel honored. Well, thank
Okay.
you all. Well, first of all, happy 50th anniversary to Earth Day. It's tomorrow.
Woo.
So I guess it's mine to start. Everyone's ready? Okay.
We're ready.
I think so. I mean, I'll just tee this up by saying, that obviously the town board had numerous conversations, voluminous conversations in 2018 and 2019 on the topic of whether we should enact leaf blower legislation in the town of Newcastle that would in some way seek to limit the use of leaf blowers primarily during the summer months. After kind of several conversations and really we were kind of spinning around and discussing the same things kind of and not getting very far. We tabled it for the time to allow the SAB, our Sustainability Advisory Board, to kind of go back, do some additional research, some additional thinking. There have also been several leaf blower laws that have in the meantime been enacted in neighboring communities, as well as ones that have been enacted previously that this gave them some additional time to look at and sort of consider. And so this is actually the first conversation that this new town board is having with the SAB, and we've invited Rand Manassi, who's been leading this initiative on behalf of the SAB, to come and present to us tonight the results of that sort of thinking and research over the course of the past several months. This is a work session, so Rand is presenting to the town board. The town board is hearing this for the first time tonight. It's an old topic, but it's a new presentation and we have new members of the town board. We are not looking to make any decisions at this juncture. We are here to sort of listen and discuss and think about sort of what the correct path is to move forward. So all that said, Rand, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Ivy. And I'm not planning on dredging up everything from the beginning. I really was hoping to just do a summary of what has happened in the past. I do a presentation to present, so I will switch to that presentation, which is really just a a summary of what we've accomplished in the past with revisions to everything that has occurred, and be more than happy to take questions after that point, as well as present the legislation that we have proposed that has gone through many iterations, and we can take it from there. So if I can, you bear with me for a second, I will try to get to the presentation, which I believe is this screen, and hopefully you are all seeing that screen now. I'll take that off. Tell me if you are seeing that screen. Do you see your presentation screen?
Yes, I
We
do.
do.
Great, good. And technology is working, and Lyle, tell me if I did something wrong. But you should now see the Newcastle proposed leaf blower environmental protection law that we originally presented a way back, but I'm presenting it now. This is based upon a report that we made a while back, and we'll represent it now. And we'll just hopefully this will work. How come it's not getting to the next one? We'll do it that way, I guess. So the executive summary, SAB has been conducting research on leaf blowers for 3 years. The SAB submitted this to the town board as a local law to significantly reduce the ill effects of leaf blowers. We have received over the years many comments on the law. We have held listening meetings from a variety of stakeholders. We've packed the town board meetings many a times. We have had public hearings from both people that are for the law and against the law. The SAB has come up to propose a revised solution that has a combination of what we are calling fuel-powered leaf blowers, or gas GLBs, standing for gas leaf blowers, which would be allowed from October through May in all areas of the town, and electric leaf blowers, which would be allowed will be allowed year-round, or which we will call ELBs for short. The old town board did have a fact-finding meeting at Ossining Leaf Blower and did gain a lot of information. The executive summary on the
I don't think everybody went to that.
No, they didn't. Ivy, I believe
might
you were
be the only person on this board who attended, so we may actually want to think about doing that. I found it incredibly helpful.
Okay, Ivy, I believe you were there. Jeremy, were you there as well? And Lisa might have been there. I don't recall. Anyway, the legislation that is being proposed at this point, which I believe you have copies of. If not, we do have a copy at the end of the presentation that we can take a look at. Stands now to say that from June 1st to September 30th, there will be, the legislation proposes that there will be no fuel-powered blowers, commonly referred to as gas leaf blowers. We call them fuel-powered blowers in the legislation because we go ahead and define them to be not only gas, but diesel or any other type of blower that will that will be powered by gas or anything that it will be using. I'm pulling it up just to give you the full definition. That's powered by gasoline, diesel, or similar fuel engine, or electric. Gas leaf blowers would not be able to be used in that period. Electric blowers would be permitted during June through September, and further defines it to be allowed to be used during the time period of Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., Saturdays 9 a.m. to 8 p.m., and Sundays and holidays 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. So allowing Sundays and holidays to have a limited time so people can enjoy their properties after 4 p.m. on a Sunday. From the period, off-season period, some people might call it, of October 1st to May 31st, you can use gas or electric blowers are permitted all season, all off-season. The exception that the law defines is that anyone that has 10 acres or more can use gas or electric at any point in time, in season or off-season. That exception is one that we can spend more time talking about. It does raise discussion, and I'll be more than happy to go into more detail as to why, but that is the only exception Well, and not the only exception. That exception is the main exception. There is an exception that's carved out in the legislation as well for municipalities, or not really municipalities, but for anybody else that is doing work on paving. And I'm going to read it directly from the legislation. It goes on to say, for public or private pothole patching or paving operations or water main break repairs, they can use it as well. It is also a noise restriction that it has to be 70 dBA or less, as measured according to industry standards. So that in a nutshell is the executive summary of the legislation. Do you want me to go on from here, or is there questions at this point?
I have a question, Rand.
Sure.
Can you now discuss the 10 acres or more, a little more detail? Because if ultimately the argument is that you don't need to blow your lawn as part of your, at least that's your position, then really, if you're 4 acres, a half acre, or 25 acres, you shouldn't be blowing your lawn no matter how much you're cutting. It could be used to clean your patio. It could be used to clean your driveway. Then why not, the structure of the house, if it's 4,000 square foot house, 3,000 or 5,000, whether it's an acre or 9 acres or 10 acres, if you want to clean around the house, it's of no consequence, the overall acreage. So then why not say it shouldn't apply to 10 acres? They have to use electric too, because even a long driveway, one could still use an electric blower. And I'm just asking this, right or wrong, I'm asking that question in terms of your position.
Sure, and this is a highly discussed item within the SAB, and it was highly discussed as we've met in the past. Should there be an exemption or not? And the feeling of the SAB is it would be lovely not to have any exemptions at all, and we, moving along that path would be a great one. But it was felt at the time that electric blowers the technology might not be there yet. That somebody with a large property might have the need to use an electric blower, to use a gas blower to adequately maintain their property. And we didn't want to limit their ability to maintain the property adequately. So we needed to give them that ability. As technology develops, and we're now a year past when we discussed it last, so maybe that argument goes by the wayside at this point. But at that point, there was discussion that the gas leaf blower was a better instrument at that point to be able to be used for that purpose.
I guess my question, Rand, is depending on what you're identifying as maintaining the property. Again, if the argument is you really don't need to use the leaf blower, to blow grass just across your lawn. If it's a driveway or around a house, it's the structure, the size of the structure and the size of the driveway. Unless you have a 1 acre long driveway, arguably what's good for the goose is good for the gander. It should be for everyone, whether it's 10 acres or half an acre or quarter of an acre.
I totally agree with Jeremy, by the way. I think that, I've always had a problem with this. I feel like it's discriminating between people who maybe have less with those who have more. And it really bothers me. And if the point of this, as you've said many times, is to eliminate noise pollution and to eliminate environmental pollution, et cetera, then allowing someone with more property to use this and who would then arguably use it for a much longer period of time is kind of flying in the face of what you're trying to do anyway.
I don't have much of an argument.
I don't think Rand's going to oppose us. I think Rand will support that position, that it should be noise pollution is noise pollution.
Right. You're preaching to the choir here. So it's hard for me to say we should eliminate the exemptions totally. So if what you're suggesting, Jeremy and Lisa, is that we don't have any exemptions at all, I would wholeheartedly agree with it. But if the ability to pass legislation requires us to carve out 10 acres or more, the SAB would support that at a minimum.
My question is more the rationale. I share Lisa's issue in terms of equity, but I also just don't understand If you have 10 acres and
Wa-
9.
Was it golf courses? Is it school fields? What is it, Rand? What is do you recall what the 10 acres were for?
Well, we have, one of your next slides includes all of those properties that.
I do have a
Oh, I'm
slide at the
sorry.
end, and I can jump to it now if you'd like. That does
Sure.
lay out how many properties fit into the over 10 acres. It's a minimal amount of properties that would fit into that.
No, that's not what I'm referring to. One of the slides that you have in the presentation lists what all of those properties were in terms of categories that we were trying to make sure we had included in the exemption. So the schools, the parks, the golf courses,
I'm going to jump to that slide now, if you don't mind. Here's a list that I got from the town with categorized by the Assessors Code's general categorization of properties that shows us by types who fits into what category. So if we were to take a look at something like community services over 10 acres, you'll see that something like schools, the over 10 acres, the school categories there are what fits into the over 10 acres. Those are the school district fits into over 10 acres. The cemeteries, T-Town, Mary Knoll, and Children AIDS. What's in 7 to 10, that category is Temple Bethel, the First Congregational Church, the Millwood Fire District. What's in 3 to 7 is Hunts Lane, Brooklyn Botanical Garden, St. Mary's Church, St. John's Church, the library, and the Presbyterian Church, just to give you some idea of what that breakdown looks like. But it's only 192.
sorry, if you can humor me for just a second.
Sure.
Can I share my screen?
I would assume so.
It says I can't share my screen while another participant is sharing.
So let me then go back and release my screen. Give me a second to find out remember how to do that.
It's in the top ribbon. There should be a red button that says.
Yeah, I'm looking for it. I just gotta get back to the meeting controls.
Okay, well, you listen. Don't do it. Don't bother. I'm looking at the version that was in the packet for the meeting tonight. So it's not the version that I think you're working off of now.
Okay.
Right.
The version that's in the packet had a previous, I guess it was a previous revised solution. It was a little hard to tell which one was the one you guys were going to be presenting tonight. So this version has exemptions: town recreation fields, school playing fields and tennis courts, country clubs, tennis courts and golf courses, homeowner association tennis courts, swim clubs, tennis courts, cemeteries, and then the store event pothole patching, sort of municipal operations. But
right, residential is not present.
Right.
Yeah. That's what Jennifer Metflag was just texting me about. So I think
this is not the version
actually,
that you guys are recommending. You're recommending the 10 acre exemption?
Yes.
Because we wanted to be able to offer the same exemption to residents as we do to these.
I'm not sure what you're looking at. Let me see if I can get back so you can present your screen. Just as I said, give me a second to switch back to controls. I'll let you stop sharing. There we go. Now you can share yours.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Okay. Okay, can you see this?
I can see what you have, yes.
Yeah, so this was the version that was included in the packet for this meeting.
Oh, yes, that was an old slide. And that's so let's focus on that and talk about that. This is why we went from that list of exemptions, which became very troublesome to work through to the 10-acre exemptions. This is an old slide. This is a slide that went back about over a year ago. Went through a lot of discussions with trying to carve out exemptions. Who should be exempt and who should not? And we could go back through this discussion, but this took us through many meetings with the town board to say, okay, who's on the list? Should the cemeteries be on the list? Should the schools be on the list? Should country clubs? Should homeowners? And as we started to put more and more, every other group raised their hands and said, I should be on the list. So where do we stop? Who do we define to be on the list? As the SAB's position is, that's fine. We can come up with a list, but where do we draw the line on who's on the list and who's not? Who's going to make that decision? It becomes difficult because you then start to have all groups starting to raise their hands saying, I want to be on the list. If the town board wants to take that on, or the town board along with the SAB wants to take it on, we are happy to do that, but it becomes a overburden or overbearing situation to do it. We're under the guidance of the town board as to how to get that accomplished. After we went through that, we then eventually came to the conclusion, along with the town board, I had thought that setting a 10-acre definition would be a much easier way to do it, 10 acres period, whether it be residential or commercial, because drawing that line as well becomes a difficult line to draw. If you say it's 10 acres non-residential, then you run into the issue of somebody who is a resident but defines their property as owned by an LLC. Is that a resident or is that a commercial property? So I look for the town's guidance here.
My only concern would be that not all of our parks are 10 acres, so I just want to make sure that we fall into that exemption, even at our facilities that aren't 10 acres, like Millwood Park's not 10 acres. Smith Park's not. Rec Field isn't.
Rec Field is not.
Right. I hear you, Ike. I appreciate that. I was in a conversation with the town of Scarsdale. They don't use gas leak blowers at all. So I do ask that we have a conversation with them to see how they're doing it.
Okay.
Okay, and so Rand, along the same lines there, I am curious. Ike raises an interesting point, not just about the size, but also when we take and we clean up
the hamlets, when we do like
our hamlets,
Chappaqua,
you know, our guys start at 7 in the morning. We're usually there from 7 to probably 9 before people are out and about. We try to do it as early as we can, but you know, the union contract sets my times for my guys. So the earliest that they would start would be, 7. We try to get out there as early as possible, but I would be very concerned about us and even school districts being able to take and clean up before the kids come into school. I appreciate the fact that we don't want them to be blowing while they're at school, clearing leaves, things like that. But I am a little bit just concerned about, timing.
Okay.
Yeah, because we do get our guys out there early for that, especially on the roadways and the sidewalks.
Okay. This legislation, remember, is only from June 1st to September 30th where restrictions occur.
But I thought there's no time restriction in the fall.
It's June 30th. It's June 1st to September 30th. And there were time restrictions, if I can get back to that slide.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, let me stop sharing my screen.
Okay. Because I guess I'm looking at the old one as well. I just want to make sure that, there's no time restriction in the fall because we do get out there early before the streets and sidewalks get busy.
And let me see if I can get back to sharing my screen.
Yep.
Just have to excuse me a second while I work with technology, even though that is my forte. Still, I think you're looking at my screen.
Right. It's only allowed from 8 to 8. So we wouldn't be allowed to use it in the morning before, 8 o'clock to be able to clean off when there aren't too many people around.
Okay,
Yeah, so even in the fall, it's 8 to 5, I think. The after 5
it
is
is
not a
8 to
problem.
5, yes.
It's the before 8 that I would be, because we're definitely out there long before 8 o'clock in the morning. And listen, it's only a handful of times in the fall that we try to do at least once a week on the sidewalks and the streets, both in Chappaqua and Millwood. But the guys are out early to do that before all the traffic, foot traffic and vehicle traffic starts.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, I'll jump in. Speaking only for myself, and I'm interested to hear what the other 10 board members have to say. But from my perspective, I would rather see the exemptions listed out the way they were in the version that I had shared just a moment ago, as opposed to the 10 acre. 10 acres to me feels a bit arbitrary. And I think it's better to be transparent about what we're actually trying to exempt, and that recognizing that commercial and institutional and public uses are different from residential uses. And so calling out what those uses are that are exempted would be my preference.
Okay. And this is the one area that is the most discussed. So if the exemptions that were on the earlier revision of the legislation and the ones that you're looking at, Ivy, and board, if this is what you think those exemptions are adequate, we can surely rewrite the legislation to match that set.
Right. I mean, the other thing that was highly discussed that I was surprised to see was in this version of the legislation is the inclusion of the 70 decibel limit on leaf blowers of all types year round. I felt that was always something that was going to be nearly impossible to enforce, and made the law overly complicated. And I've also been concerned that there's very few gas-powered blowers that are under the 70 decibel level that are on the market today, that could clear lots of any size. And so I have not been a fan of that. I think that's confusing. So from my perspective, I would rather just eliminate that requirement altogether. It just feels too challenging to me. I'd rather do something that's clear cut and readily understood. And that to me started to feel like we were splitting hairs and getting overly cute with the legislation.
I'm on board with that, Ivy.
Okay. Nick, are you on?
I am. I've been listening intently here.
Does our current do we currently have in the legislation a noise ordinance?
Absolutely. The town code has a noise ordinance, yes.
And does it set it by a DBA?
It does. I'd have to look at it specifically. I can do that offline with you.
Okay, because I believe that this comes out of that, but I don't know if it's at a DBA level or just says at a noise level. So
Yeah,
yes,
I don't
Nick and I will
recall
take a
either.
look at that. Nick and I will take a look.
It's been a while since I've looked at it.
Okay.
Can I pipe in on this?
Please.
I'm sorry.
Chief.
I think the 70 dBA is low as well. And my concern is the difference in time with the proposed legislation versus the current noise levels from domestic tools. I think it's just making it overly complicated. Other lawn equipment can be done, up until sundown, but leaf blowers can't be. I think it should be consistent with the other domestic tools.
Okay. So we'll work with Nick to make them line up with what's in the current noise legislation. I believe, as it states here, under changes, where it says noise restrictions, we put a timeline in there. Maybe it's under the hours, because it does state in the current one that it is up to sundown, but we felt it would be more advantageous to give it a timeline versus just saying sundown.
Yeah, but mowers, tractors, chainsaws, leaf blowers, wood chippers, anything else can be used, and including landscapers equipment up until sundown. So we're just going to take leaf blowers out of it. I just feel it's overly complicated and harder to enforce.
I see what you're saying, Chief. Okay,
I think maybe the thing to do would be to look at what the restrictions are on those other pieces of heavy equipment. So we may want to think about changing the allowable usage for all of those things. I don't know.
Ivy, it just says at this point that anything outside of those hours cannot exceed 45 dBA.
Oh, I see.
So it doesn't give a top limit, if I can see. Not under section C, domestic tools and equipment.
okay. So Nick and I will take a look at that and we'll try to align the two. Sound right?
That makes sense to me.
Anything else, before I move on, anything else on the revised legislation? So what I'd be looking to change in the revised legislation is change the exemptions to match to a list. The list that we had previously, the board believes is an acceptable list as I understand it today. And the noise restrictions to align with the noise restrictions as we have defined it in the tools section of domestic tools section as we've defined it already.
I concur with that.
Very good.
Well, I'm sorry. I actually don't know that this legislation needs to speak to the noise restrictions. If it's covered under the existing code, I don't know that we need to call it out here.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree. I think you are making it too complicated. Yeah, just.
Yep, I agree too. Rand, just a quick question.
Yeah.
You had said, so when we talked about this before, we thought one of the reasons for this exemption you were saying is because the electric blowers were not capable of doing this anymore, doing enough work. They weren't strong enough. And I think you just said you don't know if they have changed and if they now are strong enough. So is the SAB planning to look into that and see if everything has developed to the point that now they can do enough work and have a strong enough output that that this restriction doesn't need to be there anymore?
Let me rephrase what I might have said before. When we studied it a year ago, they were, it was really 2 years ago, they were at that point not strong enough to do what a gas leaf blower would do because the battery life wasn't strong enough and the motors were marginal. The current models that are out there, the ones at least I reviewed recently was from Ego, are now as strong as the gas leaf blowers with batteries that are are lasting as long as what you would find or give you enough power to go as long as you would go for a day's worth of work. So yes, they are now at that level, and Ego has come out with a commercial line that should allow you to do that. And towns now are starting to adopt electric blowers for their operations, as we find in Scarsdale. We're finding their town out in Long Island that's using them. So we're finding a lot more adoption where towns are starting to use them on a regular basis and not rely on gas.
Okay, thank you.
My pleasure. Shall I go on? Not that there's that much more, kept this short. So the executive summary tried to explain why we changed exemptions, noise restriction, and hours. We're going to change it again, so we'll come back on, I guess, another working session and show you where we are, if that's the path you want us to follow. Our implementation plan really hasn't changed, but maybe with the fact that we're now in a very strange world and we're in the end of April going into May, when we go when the legislation does go into place, we're probably talking about not this year, but going into next year now. Some of this will still have to be phased in over a year's time period. We should be talking about establishing a trade-in program or an incentive program to give residents the ability to ease into any electric blowers they would have to buy. We'll create an education program for landscapers that's both in English and Spanish, and residents to inform them of the new legislation and broadly encourage a green landscaping practice. We can bring in Newcastle Healthy Yards to help us with this, and the Newcastle Pollinator Pathway Coalition. And one of the things that's been talked about in the past was to establish a green landscaper certification program. I still like that idea. We would need the town board's help to some degree to do that, to come up with maybe a green landscaper referral list. The SAB would take some initiative or some lead in this, but we surely would want the town board to help us pull this together. Next steps: approve legislation, organize the trade-in program, develop and present an education seminars for residents, and explore the certification process. So that's pretty much the presentation I planned on for tonight. I did show you the chart that I came up with, which is this one here. That was the analysis we did of who fits into what category, but it probably doesn't make any sense anymore because we're going to throw out the 10 acre plus. So any other questions?
I don't have a question. One of the issues I have, I generally support this. I've said I've supported it in the past, and I raised it briefly to you. And I think I saw Dick a while ago when I was out walking with beyond our 6 feet barrier. I mentioned that one of my concerns, at least for the immediate, is people are having economic and financial problems, and irrespective of your lot size, if you have to move from your gas-powered blower to an electric one, there's a cost. And it would be presumptuous to think that because one person is maintaining themselves and doing financially okay, that everyone else is. And I'm sure there are plenty of people who are concerned about what's happening in their ability to spend extra money or no longer use landscapers, or even if they've done it on their own before. So my concern is the timing of this, number one. And number two, one of the things that I mentioned when this first came around was that we should have some sort of a plan in place where we could help try to fund for a public purpose and a public good some of these exchanges from before. And I Nick, did you ever answer that? Even though we've addressed it with regularity, did you answer that question about the legality of it?
We've had discussions. I don't think we've fully vetted it through because the legislation language was changing. I'll certainly pick it up again and have that conversation with the board.
So for me, there's a big fiscal piece of this to individuals, and a timing thing. Otherwise, I'm generally, and as I have been, supportive of it.
Yeah, actually, Rand, I think this raises a good question. Have you and the SAB had a conversation about what your recommended timing would look like for this?
No, not currently. I mean, yes, we've had many, but seeing that this keeps on, it's a moving target at this point. We would have loved to have it enacted for May for now, but seeing that we're at the end of April, I don't know if that is a timeline that we can really achieve. Seeing that we're now back to the drawing board one more time, back to another working session, maybe as soon as next week or the week after. I don't know when we can adapt legislation, and even so, then we need to start education and rollout. I don't know if this summer is even feasible anymore.
Right. I would suggest that it's not, for a lot of the reasons that Jeremy just spoke to, which is,
Right.
With the economic uncertainty that we all have as residents and homeowners, but also based on the fact that our landscapers right now are having to radically retool their business model already to deal with social distancing guidelines and so on. I wonder if this year is, I personally, I don't think this year is feasible. So that doesn't mean that I think we should stop, but maybe we should continue moving forward with the intention of seeing this thing go live on October 1st, which, then gives us until the next summer to make all of the kinds of, equipment changes and, have the green landscaper certification program, think about whether we want to do a buyback program or an incentive program. It would give us a lot of runway, I think.
Oh, I would agree with you, Ivy. I mean, if we were to move forward, I would suggest just that, is that October 1st would be a date that would give us the winter to roll out programs. Next May would be the date where the restrictions would start to play in. It is what it is at this point. And to answer Jeremy's question, then maybe hardship wouldn't be as much by then, because hopefully the economy would start to come back at that point in time.
Correct.
But really, no one knows at this point what it's going to look like by next May. We will have to just hope that we're all back to some degree of substance, and the world starts to revolve again in the right direction. I hate to say it, but let's do one step at a time. You see what we always thought would be a rollout program. It would be some type of trade-in or assistance program or some type of education program. But at this point, we're more focused on, let's just get a legislation that we all can agree to. We all agree that we need these other steps. I just want to really try to find how we get through step one, knowing that we have steps 2, 3, and 4 to go after that point.
Right.
Okay.
So I don't have any further comments or questions for Rand. Does anyone else on the town board?
I think your timing, as far as October goes, Ivy, is spot on, and also it would give the rec department opportunity to budget for electric leaf blowers for the following season, the December budget. So, because obviously, I mean, to my knowledge, I don't think the rec department currently has any electric leaf blowers on hand. So
to be clear, Lauren, under this version that we're talking about now, the rec properties would be exempt.
Oh, they would. Okay. I wasn't sure because there was still back and forth about 10 acres versus. Okay, sorry.
I still think it would be a good idea to invest in some of these machines and see, I mean, we could take a voluntary approach to this too. And so maybe it wouldn't be something that we could do on, the ball fields necessarily, but that we could use, for, smaller grassy areas around playgrounds. Or,
Right.
I'm kind of making this up, but there might be a way that we can kind of phase this over time.
And I do have a conference call, actually, convenient enough, with the superintendent of Scarsdale tomorrow. We're going to be discussing kind of what everybody's, whatever we're all talking about right now is summer camps. But I will mention this to him and ask him how it's going with the, I guess the electric powered equipment that they're using in Scarsdale right now, and kind of get his feedback on it as well. So
cool.
I can let you
And
know.
Ike, if you want me to join in on some point of a conversation with you and him, I'm more than happy to.
Okay, good to know. Thank you.
Right. Sounds great. Okay, I know you're all excited now. Now you want to move on to sludge. Is that where we are at that point of the evening?
Let's
Everybody
talk more
have a
about
great
these
night.
flowers.
Close to the end, and yes.
This has been fun. You guys enjoy the rest.
Yeah, I think I'll bow out now. And now that I was better than sludge, I'm happy about that.
Rand, thank you for all your hard work and your patience with us.
And thank you, board, for all you do.
Thanks, Rand.
Guys, have a good night.
Have a good night. Stay safe.
Thank you, Rand.
Thanks, Rand.
I can't believe I've just lost my whole sludge presentation. 1 second.
Might be in a drain.
Funny. All right, Christina, this is the resolutions. Where's the other rest of the agenda? Just have it. Give me a second, sorry. Oh my goodness, I do apologize. Christina, help me out here. Here we go. Sorry.
On page 42 of the packet.
Yes, it was here. It was just not here. Sorry. Okay, so the DPW would like to award the bid for the removal and disposal of a loam sludge material from the Millwood Water Treatment Plant to Casella Organics, who came in significantly cheaper than the other two. I mean, it's shocking.
That's weird. Why is it so much cheaper?
Don't know, but I do know that we took and actually rebid this because we had just been paying $20,000 annually for this, and the first set of bids that came in were extraordinary. They were like the second and third bidder, and Jerry didn't understand what was going on. We took and we rebid it, and we ended up with something that's we were thrilled with. But it's crazy. I don't know. I don't know what's going on, but evidently they have somewhere to dispose of it. So all the better. They're a legitimate outfit, but this is in keeping with what we are currently paying, even though the other bids are extraordinarily expensive. So
if it's
that was shocking.
Jill, do you know if it's possible to extend that beyond 1 year? I mean, if we have a price like that and we're seeing other prices, is there any within the bid or anything?
I will certainly ask them. I am concerned that I don't know if it was just because it was a year, a year's deal or what. But I do know, right? Do you recall that Jerry went out and rebid this because the other bid was 3 and 4 times what he had been paying last year?
Yeah.
Yeah. I will ask them about renewing it, but certainly we should grab this while we can.
Who's our current sludge remover?
I think it's the same people.
Then it
And
makes
he
sense
did
why
not
it
bid
would
the
be-
first time around, so we went out and rebid it. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
that's
then it makes sense
remarkable.
why it would be within what was budgeted, because it seems on par with what we've paid in the past.
Yeah. Great. Okay,
It's
excellent.
cheaper
Thank you,
for
guys.
us to do this independently as opposed to bake this into Suez's contract?
Yes, for whatever reason.
Yeah. Okay.
And I don't, this is an outfit that we've been working with for quite some time, and I don't know if it's just their relationship and they keep us with it, but I will find out about multiple, obviously they're not local, but I will find out about multiple years, and I will find out about Suez's stuff, but they have not necessarily been cheaper to piggyback onto Suez's things.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Multiple years. Okay. And next is the vertical turbine pump. Bart had sent around an email earlier today regarding the authorization to award it.
So why don't you just brief us on what that might be? I'm sorry. Bart sent this today. I didn't pull it up. I didn't read it.
Okay. So
I'll take one for the team. I know the rest of you all read it.
So this is the replacement. Hey, Lauren, do you want to do it? Lauren's up to speed on this now. We had to talk about it earlier.
No, that's okay.
But, so this is the replacement turbine pump, the wet end for the pump at the Inningwood pump station. If the board recalls, last year we had thought that we did a test for the Inningwood pump station for the conversion of the reservoir, the whole bit. Found out one of our drills didn't work. We thought we could just refurbish it. When they actually ended up pulling it out of the ground to figure out what was wrong with it, it was in serious deteriorated condition, and they were a little shocked. We thought we could just refurbish it. It was so badly damaged, we ended up having to rebuild the entire wet end. And so last year's bills ended up, we thought it was going to be about $440,000 to take and refurbish what was in the ground. We ended up with change orders of another 120, 64, and another $20,000 just to get that drill up and running, if you recall. And we were holding up the entire shutdown of the Croton Aqueduct on top of everything else. In light of that, and in light of the fact that there was another shutdown October of 2020, and one that followed for the next 3 years, and they're going to be of longer duration.
Oh, good.
We knew we needed to take and get another pump rebuilt. And so this is going out to bid to get bids for the rebuild of that turbine pump. And if you notice on the primary bid, Sulzer was the only one, they're our current vendor, they're the only one who actually submitted a bid. Although wastewaters, the alternate bid really wasn't what we had envisioned, and if you notice, they won't even remove it. And if you recall, removal is huge. It has to do with a flatbed truck with a crane on it and removing 360 feet of cylinders that lower the bit into the ground to where it actually hits the aqueduct. So this is a major thing. It was like a $200,000 expenditure just for that. Anyway, so we'd like to go back with Sulzer. Actually, it's going to be $591,235. This is coming out of water fund balance. There's nothing we can do about it. This is, by every definition, an essential purchase and an emergency purchase. We can't hold up DEP again. They were really terrific about working with us because we were really great about working with them, but their patience with us is done. We know that this is a problem. We need to get it done. We can't hold them up again. So I've got Rob on the line. He's here to answer any questions that the board may have about our expending this kind of money. We know it's a really big nut. We expected this kind of expenditure because we knew what condition the other wedding was in. So we knew it was coming. It's just been a while. Rob, is there anything else you want to add?
No, just what we talked about earlier. It was an expenditure we knew was coming. It was kind of, Lauren had asked earlier today if this had been included in the operating budget for 2020, and it hadn't. It was towards the end of the year. We didn't realize really what we had until we pulled the other pump out and realized what shape both of the pumps were in. So while it wasn't anticipated in the budget, it was something that we knew was coming. And, you know, even had we anticipated putting in the operating budget, the source of funding would have been fund balance. So we just completed the financials. The fund balance in the water fund is about $6.5 million at this point. That's the undesignated. There's a few other million for, there's, I think, another $1.5 million for that is restricted. But the undesignated fund balance there is about 6.5, and that represents about 68% of our operating budget for the year. So that's a pretty significant number. It's on the high end. So, you know, granted, we have talked about it, and we do have other projects that we're anticipating will eventually come from fund balance, but we're in a good spot there. So this wasn't unanticipated.
So that's where we are with that. That's actually, other than the payment of claims, is the last thing on our agenda. I would like to talk to you guys for a couple of minutes in executive session, and also we didn't get a chance to talk about it, but based upon our conversation with Sabrina last week about scope of services, additional scope of services for Kimley Horn, there is a revised memo that accompanied Bonnie's latest scope, and it actually brought the numbers down significantly. So I don't know if the board maybe just wants to talk about that in executive session as well, because we will need a resolution that approves that so that we could move ahead. Nick, you had circulated initially a resolution that had blanks in it. I think we may be in a position that we can fill in those blanks now insofar as what the change order was going to be.
Well, I don't think we should approve the change order with Kimley Horn until we finalize the scope.
Right.
I mean, we can have it ready to go for next
Yeah,
week.
so that'll be, yeah. No, I just wanted to make sure that the board was comfortable with the, what was actually included
Mm-hmm.
in this, that it matches what we talked about. Okay, so Nick, maybe we'll have it for next time. Okay,
Yes. Mhm.
so do you want to do payment of claims and then we'll go in and speak to council perhaps for advice of council?
And you also have a resolution on the dog leash at
That
Gidney
sounds about
Park.
right?
Yep.
Yes, yes. So we can do those two now. Did Diana actually send out a resolution? Lauren, is there a resolution on?
I have it. Do you want me to? I have the resolution. So.
Oh, great. Okay.
Okay. I move to approve the payment of claims in the amount of $580,782.44 listed on the summary pre-check writing report and detailed voucher detail report, each prepared on April 21st, 2020. Checks will be issued and mailed to each claimant listed on Wednesday, April 22nd, 2020.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 And the dog resolution, Nick circulated it to the board?
Do you wish me to read it?
Yeah, go ahead, Nick. You go
Yes,
ahead.
please.
You're the best. Thank you. Resolution to require dogs be leashed in Gedney Park, whereas the town board and the Newcastle Recreation Commission has the power and responsibility pursuant to Article 13 of the General Municipal Law of New York and Chapter 27 of the Town Code for the operation and maintenance of the making, publishing rules regarding the park, whereas Section A143-5.f of the Town Code provides that the dog shall not be permitted to run without a leash in any park grounds or areas at any time, and further states that a leashed dog shall be permitted on any park trails at any time, and a dog shall be permitted to run without a leash on any park trails at any time, provided the dog is under visual and voice control. And whereas social distance requirements established in response to the COVID-19 pandemic are difficult to maintain on the town's trails with dogs running loose, and whereas in response to this concern, the commission has recommended the town board adopt a rule to provide that dogs be on leashes while in town parks. Now therefore be it resolved that the town board of the town of Newcastle hereby amends section A143-5.f of the town code to provide that so long as there is a state of emergency in the town of Newcastle related to COVID-19, no dog shall be permitted within any area of Gedney Park, including but not limited to the park ground, trails, parking lot, or any other area, without being on a leash not exceeding 6 feet in length, and be it further resolved that this rule shall be enforced through the issuance of an appearance ticket under Article 150 of the Criminal Procedure Law.
Second.
All in favor?
Actually, I have to move, I guess. I gotta
Wait,
move.
he has to move, right? Thank you.
I move. My apologies.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Sorry, Nick. We made you, or I made you temporary board member.
I appreciate it. Deputy town board member, I like it.
Okay,
Beacon.
all righty. Okay, so we'll have a motion to go into executive session. Rob, you going to join us?
Go ahead, Nick. You can move.
Want to do the, did we do the vertical turbine pump? Are we awarding the?
Oh, I'm sorry. Was there a resolution for that? Yes?
But I think we want to award it tonight, right?
Okay.
Is there a
Is
resolution?
there a resolution?
Not a resolution. I'm just drafting one up right now. I
All
didn't
right,
really
so
think on it tonight. I'm sorry.
just
Did I just do something?
executive session.
Well, is there a rush to do it now? Should we just wait till next week then? So you don't have to
Is-
do it quickly?
Rob, do you know if
It's
next
pretty
week is okay
urgent.
with Bart? Does it matter?
I'm not sure.
Sounded a little urgent.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. Although Diana won't be in the rest of the week to do a purchase order, but she will be in early Monday and Tuesday next week. So I don't know.
Okay, so do we want to, 1 second, let me just see. So it would be to,
Yeah, I apologize. I'm looking for the.
I don't know why I keep losing the silly thing. Oh, here it is, right here. So it's authorization to award the contracted contract to Solzer. 1 second. There we go. Solzer in the amount of $591,235 plus the cost of the pump field test for a total amount of $598,735. the Sulzer Pump Services, the purchase of a vertical turbine pump for the Inningwood Pump Station.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you.
All right.
And then do you just need,
All
do you
right.
take your motion, your vote to go into executive session and noting that the board will not take any further action, will just come out of executive session to adjourn?
So moved on that.
Yep.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, great.
I made the
So
motion,
this is
Jill.
8:14.
You did.
Okay.
You made the motion.
Jeremy, Lisa, Cass. Okay, we're good to go. Okay, thank you, guys. All right,
Okay, just hold
Lyle,
a
you'll
second
stop us
while I
from
take
recording.
this offline. Hang on
All
a
right,
second.
Lauren, I'll see you tomorrow, okay?
Thank you.
9 o'clock, department head.
Thanks, Lyle.
Happy Administrative Assistance Day. Thank you. Appreciate everything.
Hey,